Constructionism is a major theory that is applied to the sociology of deviance. Its components contrast with positivism. In summary, positivism is the study of deviance by trying to figure out what causes a person to act out in certain ways that differ from the rest of society. Positivist theories try to understand what causes a person to become deviant, and they conclude that the reasoning of this is due to environmental factors in a person's life. Constructionism, on the other hand, is the belief that the deviance does not exist unless society labels something as deviant. Constructionist theorists do not try to figure out what causes a person to become deviant, but rather they try to understand why certain acts are seen as deviant to a society. Constructionism was developed in the 1960s as a challenge to positivism. A major perspective held by constructionist theorists is relativism, which led to the development of labeling theory. Broadly stated, labeling theory is interested in the interpretations of certain behaviors by society. Deviant behavior does not come from the behavior itself, but rather it comes from people's minds. Society will see a behavior as either negative or positive. A positive behavior is a behavior that is typical of a society. So positive behavior can be thought as conforming behavior. A negative behavior, on the other hand, is a behavior that is not typical of the rest of society. And a negative behavior, perceived negative behaviors are labeled by society as deviant. Essentially, labeling theorists propose two questions. They are interested in who is labeled as deviant and who is labeling the deviant. They're also interested in the repercussions the label has on both the labeler and the labeled. A major key in many branches of constructionist theories is that the labeler is typically the most powerful person in a society, such as people who fall into a higher socioeconomic class, while the ones who are labeled are usually the weaker people in society who usually fall into the lower socioeconomic class. Labeling people as deviant can cause negative consequences for the person who is being labeled as deviant. Once labeled, the person may accept this label and continue to behave in such ways that cause them to be labeled in the first place, and this further separates them from the conventional society. According to labeling theorists, this is most likely to occur once the person who is labeled as deviant after their first behavior accepts the term deviant in their second behavior. This is known as primary and secondary deviation. These terms were created by Edwin Lemmer in 1951. And it is of great interest for labeling theorists to understand how a person goes from primary deviation to secondary deviation. And it should be noted that not everyone goes from primary to secondary deviation. While labeling a person as deviant can have negative consequences on the person who is labeled, alternatively, being the labeler can have positive consequences on society as a whole. And this, according to labeling theorists, this is because labeling a person as deviant increases the development of social order. People are able to distinguish in a society what is right and what is wrong, and this enables them to make choices that will enrich the rest of society. Labeling theory is very popular among sociologists. There have been a substantial amount of research to support this theory. However, there are still a few criticisms to this theory. One criticism is that the theory cannot explain what causes deviant behavior. This, however, is not what labeling theory aims to do. Labeling theory is not trying to explain what causes primary deviation, but rather it is meant to explain to us how labeling after primary deviation can cause secondary deviation. Another critique is that while there have been many studies supporting that labeling causes secondary deviation, there have been other studies that have shown that labeling does not cause secondary deviation. The research is not entirely consistent. This could be because, as Edwin Lemmer explained, secondary deviation does not occur unless someone accepts that label that they have been given. Many people are able to reject the label and refrain from deviant behaviors.